All right, welcome into Back Porch Sports. It is the Friday, July 10th, before Atlanta United starts the MLS is Back campaign in Orlando. And joining me, John Michaels and Jason Butt today. Eric Quintana of the Mouths of the South podcast knows everything about Atlanta United. Eric, what's your mindset going into this weekend for Atlanta United?
Well, I'm excited that they're back to finally playing soccer. I think we've seen 2 games so far, and it's looked rusty. 3 games, I'm sorry. It's looked rusty, but I'm just glad that we're back to something that looks like sports. I know that the NWSL has been on for a few weeks, so you've had that to kind of hold you over if you were waiting for Atlanta United to get back into town or get back to playing. But now that they're kind of in the full swing of things, it looks like it's at the very least going to be an entertaining tournament. We've had 2 teams cancel already, or have to opt out because of the coronavirus stuff. So hopefully that doesn't continue. We don't see more of that, but otherwise it looks like it's going to be a fun month of soccer for us.
Clearly, I mean, we specifically think about soccer. We've seen soccer played, just not to the full scale that MLS has taken on with the MLS is Back tournament. So, that's encouraging, I guess. My worries when I think about team sports coming back, you got NASCAR, those guys are all wearing helmets. They're all wearing masks. You got golf. It's a golfer and caddy relationship. With soccer, this is our first foray into seeing guys that are jumping up in each other's faces to go for a header or chase down a ball or a tackle. So until we see the numbers a couple weeks out, I think it's at least an encouraging sign to see some level of team sports coming back, except for, like you mentioned, Dallas and Nashville down in Orlando having to back out.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like everything that they're doing is they're doing it the right way. So they put all these players inside this bubble. I think it's similar to what the NBA is going to do and whatever baseball is going to end up trying to do. It's these players basically aren't leaving the floors on their hotel. I think they can leave their room. I know that they've taken a bunch. The players have talked about having taken a bunch of stuff that will give them stuff to do while they're in their rooms, waiting between training sessions and between games and whatnot. But from what I understand, often they're being tested. I think before each game, they've been tested before they get there. They've been tested before they fly in. They'll get tested before they leave. I think that if you're going to try to do this is probably the best way to go about it. I don't know, because we've had 2 teams in Nashville and FC Dallas kind of opt out of this because of the high numbers of positive tests. I do wonder what that means for other leagues when they pop up into the sports scene, like the NFL, like Major League Baseball, who have just a ton of more players or a ton of more people they have to account for. I think with soccer, I want to say it's at most maybe 30, 35 people, and you might have that on an entire baseball roster. So it just depends on what goes on. I like the way that MLS is going about it. I'm really hopeful that we don't have any more positive tests that would kind of derail the whole tournament as a whole. But I am hopeful that this to last the extent of the month, the extent of the tournament, and then we'll see about the 9 games after MLS's Back tournament is done.
What's interesting for me, this will be the first Atlanta team sports event, I believe, since the Hawks played in mid-March when the NBA started pulling teams off the floor. Atlanta United may have played in Mexico. They may have actually been the last ones to play. I think, as a matter of fact, they lost in Mexico 3-0 or something like that right after the Hawks had finished up. When we start to talk about the hype of Atlanta United, I know it's not going to be Mercedes-Benz Stadium. I know there's not 75,000 people, but I know Saturday night for myself at 8 o'clock, I'm going to be sitting down in front of Fox Sports South, and I'm going to be watching Atlanta United. Eric, when you talk to all of the United, all the Five Stripe fans, do you feel they feel the same way, like this is the moment we've all been waiting for?
Yeah, I mean, they're excited. The people that I talk to, they're waiting for this to kind of kick off. They're waiting for Atlanta. They're waiting for tomorrow night, 8 o'clock against the Red Bulls. The cool thing about their Atlanta United, it developed a rivalry with the New York Red Bulls. New York, they like to press insanely. They are very much a fan of the high press. They'll go after you in your own half, in your defensive third. And so from everything I've read, from everything I understand, Chris Armas, the head coach for the Red Bulls, wants to get that going. Maybe not as intense of a pace, especially early out, but he wants to keep that going. So it'll be interesting. It'll be fun for Atlanta to react to that. Two, Atlanta United seems to play pretty well, at least recently, against teams that like to high press. I think that with the addition of guys like Joseto and the development of Emerson Hyndman and, Pity kind of finding his feet and Barco doing the things that he does, and everyone just in general being healthy, you'll find that they'll be able to kind of maneuver themselves out of these situations. I think that the fans are hopeful for a semblance of kind of what they were hoping to get, 4 months ago. And to kind of see that, even though there won't be any fans in the stands, even though there won't be any like crowd noise or anything like that, you'll at least get the passion, at least in your home or on your laptop or wherever you're watching this. I've only gotten good feelings out of this. I initially was questioning the whether this was worth it or not, but seeing the reaction from the fan base and kind of the positivity that you get out of talking about Atlanta United and their eventual return to play, I think that by itself makes it worth it.
Eric, what are you looking specifically to see from Atlanta United in their return to play? And also, what do you think the biggest key matchup is with these two teams? You kind of touched on New York Red Bulls' ability to press, but where do you really see this, a key important matchup that people should really take into account now that these teams are back?
One and Columbus, the Columbus Crew would be a two key matches to watch out for. What I'm curious as to what Frank DeBoer is planning on doing with the starting 11, because there's been a lot of talk about, how do you fill the gap that Joseph Martinez leaves since being injured? How do you line up your team to attack and go forward, and how do you kind of replace the production that you got out of Joseph Martinez? Now, Joseph Martinez had been playing differently this year under Frank DeBoer, even a little bit last year, but toward the end of last year, where he was playing more of a false nine. You've seen a little bit in Dirty South Soccer talking about it. I know we've talked about it in our podcast. The idea that if you put Pity in that false nine role, which is basically a back to goal type of player that you can kind of play off of. So guys like Barco, whoever you ended up putting on the right side, could kind of play off of him and then kind of move freely to court in that regard. And I think that benefits him more because it was more of what he did at River in Argentina. So it's a chance for Frank to show how good of a manager he is in a situation like this. You got to imagine that Bark will be on the left, Pity would be in the middle as that false nine. I'm not sure who you put on that right side yet, but then the midfield is going to be interesting as well, because you're talking about a guy like Joseto who's got the ability, and a little that we did see of him, that he can be a game changer for you. You don't know what you're doing with Emerson Hyndman yet. And then you've got the discussion between, and this kind of includes Emerson Hyndman, but you've also got the discussion between Eric Rometti and Jeff Larenowitz as those defensive center mids. So how you kind of maneuver those two aspects of the field is going to be very interesting to see. And you can't really do anything with the addition of Jurgen Damm because he can't play until August. Eric Lopez is still not officially signed United, but going to be under sort of restraints from MLS that even if he did sign anytime soon, he wouldn't be able to play till August. So you do take that into consideration, and you do wonder what Frank DeBoer does to kind of how he maneuvers the lineup throughout this tournament. I think the back four, assuming it's a back four, is pretty much set. And you like what you're seeing out of Meza and kind of the upgrade that he's been from LGP. Defensively, I think they'll be fine because this is a back four that's strong. With between Miles Robinson now getting healthy, George Campbell, who can be a fantastic replacement, Franco Escobar, who we know exactly what he is on that right side, and then you got a decision at left back. So it all just kind of depends on what Frank DeBoer wants to do. But I'm excited to see what he does in this environment where he's going to be tested right out the gate with a team like the Red Bulls, and then later on with a team like Columbus Crew. I'm not trying to push aside at FC Cincinnati, but they're still very young. They're still very much the of a or an expansion team that we've all come to know in MLS.
So, Eric, United did have a couple guys test positive, and as far as we know, one of them is back with the club, still waiting, as far as I know, for the second one to come back. I think it's at least encouraging to know that just in the landscape of sports. You look at guys like Jimmy Johnson. As long as guys are recovering and feeling like they're okay with coming back, we're certainly not going to hold it against anybody that decides to sit out. But it is an encouraging sign to see guys are able and ready to come back and play, even if they're dealing with the disease.
Well, it's encouraging, but that might also be a product of their agreement, the MLSPA agreement with MLS, and what MLS is forcing some of these players to do. Remember, before this tournament even came around, it was hey, either you play in this tournament, then we're gonna make up, or you're gonna get your benefit and not gonna pay you. So I don't know how much of a choice they actually had in the matter. I know a lot of these guys aren't making much over, if even over $100,000. It's not, we're talking about professional athletes, but not nearly in the same, salary range as say the NFL or the NBA. So a lot of these guys are it's normal average, well, not whatever, normal upper middle class type of pay. You've got the exceptions and guys like Joseph Martinez and whatnot, but a lot of these guys can't lose that paycheck, can't lose the benefits, because that's how they provide for their families. And it's a very real situation to be told, hey, we're going to cut your pay and your benefits if you don't play. So I don't know the super ins and outs of maybe how they're being kind of, whether their arms are being twisted to play in this tournament. But I know that a lot of the players are very much like, why are we doing this? At least that's the sentiment I got. I'm sure now that they're there, they're like, all right, well, we're going to this extent and it all. I have a feeling that if you were to poll some of these players, at least half would be like, yeah, I don't really want to be here. Not with what's going on. You're making us leave our family. You're threatening us by cutting our pay, by cutting our benefits, and then we're having to leave our family, expose ourselves to coronavirus, and then we got to go back to leave our family and not be able to help them in case they do get it, and then we got to go back to our family and go through the testing process and potentially expose them on the way back or something to that effect. So it is encouraging that these are healthy athletes, so it's not like coronavirus is they're not high risk by any means, but I don't know how happy they are to actually be there as players as a whole.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting part of it, because look at Nick Markakis with the Braves. He's well off enough financially to make the decision that he doesn't need to play, but you do hear other guys that, like Ozzie Albies, we just heard from him today with the Braves. He's certainly in a fine spot financially, and he's ready to go, and he's hungry to play. So every athlete is processing this in a different way, but they all have their own decisions to make, and unfortunately some of the financial ramifications are more real for some guys than it is for others. Yeah, for sure. I mean, they're not nearly in the same ballpark as some of these other leagues, specifically NBA where players hold most of the power. MLB, we know what's been going on with them. The NFL, I'm curious as to what happens and how, because I think if there's a league that where players could decide to opt out, that might be the one where they're going to be most vocal, because it seems as NFL is kind of going above and beyond to cater to their players, considering everything that's going on recently in the United States. So I would imagine that the NFL, if there's a likelihood of players deciding to opt out, it'd be something like the NFL. I know that MLS just the average player can't afford not to get paid, and so to be threatened to have their pay cut and their benefits cut and all that stuff, that wouldn't, obviously it didn't go well for them, because everything they gained in the new CBA for them, they basically had to give back in this renegotiation. So come 5 years from now, I think it's 2025 that they get to talk about this again. Come 2025, the players are going to be very upset, and they're going to remember this. I know a lot of players came out of those discussions very upset. You heard Jeff Lorenowitz or the audio clips after the decision was made, or after he got the emails, talking about how it left a very sour taste in his mouth, and he wasn't going to quickly forget about this. And so I assume that's 2025 they get to talk again, and the players not only going to want what they lost in this CBA, but probably much, much more.
We all know Atlanta United lost Joseph Martinez, obviously a huge loss, but it's been so long, and I guess coronavirus has kind of sapped my memory. I forget Tito Villalba's gone. You forget Darlington Nagbe's not there. how much of an impact, and I know they played a couple of matches without the two of them, but how much of an impact do you have not having guys like that, especially somebody like Tito, who was so creative with the ball at the head, not having him there? Where is that going to impact this team moving forward?
Well, Tito, I wasn't the biggest fan of. That's not a secret. I was not the biggest fan of Tito. I thought he was kind of a one, and contrary to what I think most fans passionately believe he was, I thought that he was he didn't give you enough. And I think that if two coaches basically say the same thing about you, I think that that's a sign that, one, that I'm right, and that behind the face about the first selection or the first designated player for Atlanta United, the nostalgia, I guess, that comes with having a player like that leave. The good memories that we did have with him. I'm not saying he was an absolute train wreck or anything. We fantastic memories of Tito Villalba, but what you lost in Tito, you're getting in Jurgen Damm. Now, you don't necessarily get to play him right away in this tournament, but he's everything you wanted out of Tito. He's fast. I think he's been listed as the second, or maybe unofficially, the second fastest player in the world. So he's got the Tito speed, if not more than the Tito speed, and I think he's better with the speed. Now, statistically, it's not all there because he's got like 208 appearances and like 7 goals or something like that. So it's not all there. So you wonder how that transition from Liga MX to a league like MLS, specifically with Atlanta United, how that kind of maybe changes things for him, how he's able to adapt. But he's a fantastic player. But he's the thing you want, Tito. And the loss of Darlington is going to be huge because you got to find a good replacement for him. And we've only seen 2 games, so it's not enough of a sample size to know that anyone they've replaced – and you're not going to replace Darlington Nagbe. You're just not. He's that good of a player. He's that much of an impact to any team. But how Frank de Boer and Atlanta United are able to make up for his loss is important. We haven't seen enough of a sample size. We've seen the Emerson experiment, the Emerson Hyndman experiment. We've seen, Eric Rometti and Jeff Lorenowitz behind, kind of filling in that role. But that none of those players, the 3 of those players, aren't going to be anywhere near what Darlington Nagbe was. Joseto is a player that potentially could give you something to the level of Darlington Nagbe. I think that he's a different player. He's probably better with the ball at his feet. His distribution is going to be something that we're still waiting to find out about. But if it were up to me, Joseto would be the replacement for it. Time would place that in air quotes for Darlington Nagbe, and then you'd put Joseto kind of up top on this diamond. Ask Emerson to kind of bone up defensively a little bit, be a little bit better in that regard, and work on his distribution, and then put either Jeff Lorenowitz or Eric Rometti next to him, whoever you feel more comfortable with as that center defensive mid role, kind of by his lonesome, because what you'll see is Joseto kind of move forward with the attack, while Emerson Hyndman is going to be kind of that I guess that safety for Atlanta United. Much along the lines of what Darlington Nagbe did. So losing him is huge, but at least in the first couple of games, we saw where they were able to manage without a guy like Darlington Nagbe. And I think a guy like Joseto, giving him more time, giving him more experience with this team to kind of build the relationships that we're looking to see with him and the players around him, I think in time you'll see that you're not going to you're not going to miss him as much.
The last time this team played was on March 11th, as John mentioned. Tomorrow will be 4 months to the day of their last match. What is a realistic expectation in terms of level of play, style of play that you think fans should have given the long layoff?
On paper, you'd expect them to probably win the group. I think that's a solid expectation. You'd expect them to advance for sure. I think it'd look like a failure if they did not advance out of the group and head into, I think it's the quarterfinals of the tournament. I don't know in terms of what you'll see on the field. It's hard to say because you haven't seen these guys play. You barely have seen them train. These guys I assume that they've been doing some kind of conditioning programs since they've been, away from for the last months. I don't know. On paper, everything looks great for Atlanta United. They know what to expect with the Red Bulls. They know how to handle that. They've been there, done that before. I think they're a better team now to kind of handle that. How they handle Columbus is going to be kind of a tricky thing because they haven't played against anyone as good as Don Nagby, who can kind of be that director on the field, so to say. And Columbus has some attacking power that I think a lot of people are going to forget about when they see Columbus again. Cincinnati, I'm not as worried about just because, again, they're the typical expansion team with an MLS, and they still got a couple of years before they – I'm not saying they can't – Cincinnati can't beat Atlanta United, but I think it's less likely that a team like Atlanta United, as veteran as it is, as experienced, as talented as it is on paper, would look at Cincinnati, not look past them, but look at Cincinnati and not think, okay, we can definitely handle this team. New York Red Bulls and Columbus are going to be a tougher task, but this is easily a 3 winnable matches for them. But again, it's hard to say for sure what to expect out of guys like Joseto, who hasn't had a lot of who depends on match experience to keep his skill level up. Same thing with Barco. Same thing with Pity. I would expect basically everyone on the field tomorrow to relatively be rusty, which is why it probably benefits a team like the Red Bulls to play a team like Atlanta United first, because they can capitalize off that rust. The one thing you see out of a high press is mistakes in the back. And so you've got Miles Robinson, as fantastic as he's been, that's his one criticism, how he plays in the back. You haven't seen enough out of Fernando Meza to really to understand whether he's a player that can handle that pressure. You know what you have in Franco Escobar, and it's still kind of a question mark of who you play at left back. But as a team, they've seen the Red Bulls. They know what to expect. But you also got to keep in mind, because it's the first match, because it's going to be if you had to tilt the game in one way or the other, I'd probably tilt in the way of the Red Bulls, simply because of the mistakes that are likely going to be made. And so it's whether the Red Bulls can capitalize on those mistakes, whether Atlanta United can minimize the number of chances they give the Red Bulls, and whether Atlanta United can capitalize on their own opportunities, assuming they can create, because that's the one thing I think we saw in the first 2 matches. There was not a ton of creation. They capitalized on the chances they did have, but there wasn't a ton of creation that really led you to think, led you to believe that this team, it was clicking on all cylinders from the get-go. So that's the one thing you kind of hope to see, that maybe you won't, because it's the first match after 4 months and because the rust is still going to be on. It just depends on how well they've trained, how well Frank de Boer is kind of prepared for this moment, and what the players individually have done since not being able to be on a training field, since not being able to kind of practice with the team, and help build and establish those relationships we're going to see in 2020.
I'll bring it back to the Braves again, because that's the other Atlanta franchise we've actually been able to speak with over the last few days. But they were speaking about how tough it is to kind of manufacture the adrenaline of playing in front of a live crowd. And obviously with soccer, and with Atlanta United specifically, that is a monumental part of the game. How have you seen the lack of crowd attendance, the lack of that vibe, the lack of the tifos, and just the electricity around a match? How have you seen that impact the product on the field, if at all?
I don't know, because these players are used to the idea of playing in fanless stadiums. It happens, unfortunately, in Italy a lot due to racism, where the league, or I think it's the league, will force the team to play in closed stadiums for a number of matches, as punishment. And so the idea of playing in front of fans is not anything crazy. It is for baseball. It is for like the NFL and NBA. But for guys like me who have watched soccer for pretty much all his life, I've seen that before. Whether it affects the players, I'm not sure. As a fan, as a spectator, I like the idea of every now and then being able to hear the players. I don't like the pumped in crowd noise that you're hearing in the Premier League. I think it's just weird to see an empty stadium and still hear the boos of the refs or the cheers of a goal when I know there's no one there.
Right.
But I do
that is eerie, man. It's eerie. I'm not a fan either.
I do like hearing the way that these players interact with each other, because that's not something you see every day. That's not something you get to experience every day. You get a better sense of who these players are amongst each other as a soccer player, and how the relationships kind of have established themselves. And relationships, these groups of players who are constantly playing with each other, and they get a good sense of how they play. It's kind of like the relationship between a quarterback and a wide receiver. You know exactly when that receiver is going to cut. You know how he's going to cut. You know how he's going to approach, a catch. You know which shoulder to throw it over to in certain situations. It's the same in soccer. When you're playing off of each other and you're trying to figure out what to do next in relationship to what the player is doing. And so that only comes through experience. So thankfully, a lot of these players have been together enough to where they know each other, and playing in a family stadium for them, I think won't be a big deal. Because they'll probably be it's weird because I've never experienced I'm obviously not an athlete, so I don't know exactly how to put myself in their shoes in this moment as a professional athlete. But as a spectator, I like the idea of being able to hear, the communication between the players. I like hearing the communication in the coach bench, and I like what's going on as opposed to just hearing the drones of the crowd. I enjoy it for what it is. I can't wait to get back to where we're watching Mercedes-Benz Stadium at 70,000. But until then, I'm going to enjoy it while I got it.
I noticed something on Wednesday night. I was watching Miami and Orlando City. First of all, the hell with Orlando City actually winning a match. Miami blew that one late. But I noticed players, they weren't concerned about coronavirus. Guys were diving into each other. They were hitting each other, doing whatever they needed to do. The second part to that, though, I noticed fitness in the second half really took a toll. Miami looked like they hit about the 70-minute mark and just were completely gassed. How liberal will Frank DeBoer be with substitutions on Saturday night?
I would assume a lot more liberal, because what MLS and I think all of FIFA has done is basically switch to 5 subs for these matches. And it looks like it's going to roll over into next year as well. So if you tip 3 and now you have 5, you're probably going to use them more often. It also depends on where these players are at in their conditioning, because you obviously don't want to pull a player off like Barco unless you have to. You don't want to pull a player off like Piri or Joseto unless you have to. You don't want to have to pull off some of these key players that are going to help contribute to the team going forward in the attack unless you absolutely have to. Defensively, the back four, you typically don't want to disrupt that either, because they've been playing all 70 minutes together, and you want to keep that relationship. You don't want to disrupt that at all as best you can, unless he's unless a guys like Meza or Miles Robinson are absolutely dogging it at that point. You don't really want to disrupt that. The changes are typically going to come on the wings. So for like a Barco, for whoever plays on the right side, or anyone in the midfield, that typically is where the change comes from. Sometimes you'll see players get pulled for certain position groups and then replaced with say a forward if they're down to kind of numbers forward. That stuff does happen. What you also have now is 2 water breaks. So I think the first one is at the 30th minute. The next one is of the first half. And then the one in the second half is at the 75th minute. Yes, 75th minute, I believe. So that's all kind of a product of, we understand the situation that, these players aren't going to be as conditioned as they typically are. You're playing in Florida. It's going to be hot. It's the middle of summer. All that stuff goes into it. I would expect you'll probably see the same amount of, sluggishness, I guess, to start. But I think as the tournament progresses, you'll see that get better and better and better. I think you saw that the same with the NWSL. At first, you saw kind of some sluggishness at first, and then the players started really getting into the fitness of everything. They had more than like 2 or 3 weeks to kind of prepare for this thing. So they were able to kind of work way back into as much of full fitness as you possibly get back to. I do think the water breaks help. I do think the 5 subs help. It'll be interesting to see, because that really changes the game. It really changes the dynamic of how you approach the second half of the second half. So say like the 70th minute on, because now you can put fresh legs up top, you can put fresh legs in the wings, and you can take advantage of these defenders who aren't going to be in the best of condition, fitness-wise, as they might be in the middle of the regular season of a typical MLS season. So it'll be interesting how he approaches it. I know that just to give you an example, the U.S. men's national team, when Jurgen Klinsmann was the manager, he was praised as being the best head coach you could possibly have with 5 subs, because international friendlies you have 5 subs, and that's the Germany game I think we saw a few years back where everyone was very Klinsmann is of the fact that, they found a way to win those international games that mean absolutely nothing. But when you change the dynamic of these how you approach these subs, it can really help you. It can also hurt you because you may be pulling someone off too early. You may be pulling someone off that would typically be on and be able to contribute in those last 20 minutes. You may overthink the whole situation entirely. It just depends on how Frank de Boer kind of wants to handle this. And he's a ridiculously experienced manager. So I'm sure he's talked to everyone about this. I'm sure he knows exactly what to do. I'm not doubting him for a second when it comes to substitutions. I would hope and I would expect him to be a little more liberal when it comes to how often he does sub and how early he subs. Now that he knows that he has more than 3 and has 5, he can basically do whatever he wants. That doesn't necessarily mean he has to use them, but it gives him an opportunity to assess much earlier what he wants to do and make changes depending on what's on 10 minutes into the second half.
The most fascinating thing to me about the time that we're in is the long-term effects in industries and in relationships that wouldn't have happened if not for COVID. I mean, look at us talking on a Zoom call right now. I would imagine that for the rest of our business being the way it is in sports media and in journalism and in business at large, people will be having meetings like this more often than they did just by necessity. So when you look at Major League Soccer, do you see anything on the way that they conduct business or the way that games are structured or rule changes that could happen because of the situation we're in right now?
Well, the 5 sub thing, it looks like they're going to take it into next year as well. I think because there's an understanding that this isn't going to, be done in 2020. So I think they're going to roll that over to 21, which I think is a good thing. I think after that, you can pretty much roll it back to normal, assuming that we're all back to normal. What I do kind of like is that for someone like me who enjoys covering the team, who wants to cover the team, who wishes he could be in Orlando, do in-person interviews and stuff like that, what it looks like they're doing is basically just doing everything through Zoom calls, Zoom meetings and stuff like that. So any kind of media interaction with the team, with the players, with the coaches, it's all done through Zoom. There's a lot more. It's easily accessible for someone like me who for anyone that's credentialed or whatever. Easily accessible. It's a lot more convenient. It's saved and they basically push out the audio right then and there. So then it's easy for me to cut it up and use it in the podcast or the radio show. That's the obvious that I've seen. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that would be a product of COVID and a big change.
Well, soccer's pretty cut and dry, right? It's not like baseball where you're putting a runner on second in extra innings and stuff like that. I mean, it's a pretty simple sport that doesn't really need too much tinkered with. But when you mentioned the 5 sub rule, that kind of made me think about that and just made me wonder, is there anything that Major League Soccer could be doing better or differently? But that's one to watch. I think that is pretty interesting to see how they handle that in the years ahead.
Yeah, the nature of the game, just you're gonna have these guys you're gonna have these guys touching each other.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You're gonna have these guys in close proximity. You're gonna have these guys tackling each other. You're gonna have these guys spitting on and sweating on each other. Like there's no way to avoid, you can't social distance within the games. Just like you couldn't social distance within the NFL or basketball, really baseball for that matter. Baseball I guess you could a little bit theoretically, but it's not gonna. If you're gonna bring sports back, you gotta put the protocols in place like MLS is to eliminate limit the number of possibilities that these players would have to actually contract it, and then not to downplay it, but these are athletes in excellent shape. They're not high risk, so it's an opportunity. And much like any other professional athlete, they're not high risk. I mean, you look at the one exception I would say is Freddie Freeman, who seems to be taking this harder than most athletes would for whatever reason. But these athletes are in the best of shape. I assume that they've still been conditioning throughout the last 4 months they have been playing. And so that all kind of plays into this mentality that, well, if we create this bubble for them, if we get them tested so that we know that no one going into the bubble has it, and then get them tested again so that, we make sure they're not leaving the bubble with it. The one question I do have is apparently the people that are working within the bubble, they can leave the bubble re-enter the bubble. So that's
the craziest thing to me.
As I'm fairly confident that's exactly how it works. Because I think Jonathan Tannenwald for the Philly Inquirer was asking Darren Eales specifically about that, about he mentioned bus drivers as an example. They'll be able to go home, go be with their families, and they'll be able to re-enter the bubble. Now they'll be masked up and everything, I assume, but they can leave and come back. And I assume that in that you can transmit it or you can pass it to players theoretically. But I assume it's been thought of. I assume that now that they're in the hotels, they're basically in the hotels. They're not really leaving. Basically, it's a business trip for all intents and purposes. It's not going to, they're not going to the clubs. They're not going to restaurants. They're not going to bars or anything like that to have a good time. They're strictly to play in this tournament and then go home when they're done.
Where can we follow you on Twitter, and what do you expect on Saturday night?
You can follow me at Eric G. Quintana. I follow the podcast at MOTS Podcast on Twitter. It's Malice of the South Podcast. We're on iTunes. If you search Dirty South Soccer, we're under that umbrella. So if you look for our episodes are Malice of the South episodes, there's another podcast involved as well. We're on every Tuesday, typically every Tuesday on the radio. 106.3 extra 106.3. What was the Sports X? From 7 to 8 on Tuesdays, and the podcast usually is recorded that night or the next day, just depending on the availability of the three of us that do it. And it's me, Josh Bagriansky, Sam Franco. We enjoy doing it. I think we're the longest running. I'm fairly confident we're the longest running Atlanta United podcast. I'm not gonna say we're the first, but we're the first big one.
It's still around. That's still here.
But yeah, that's still around.
Awesome, Eric. Thank you so much, dude. Y'all follow Eric. Follow Malice of the South and everything they have going on this weekend. It's great to see an Atlanta team back in action. That is just exciting as hell. I can't wait to see how that goes. Atlanta United, the favorites to win the group, and that journey starts with the Red Bulls. Y'all have a great weekend. Make it great for somebody else, and we'll catch you next week.